Hello everybody and welcome to another online lesson. Today we are going to look at how the arms race developed, essentially kickstarting the whole Cold War and the next 40 odd years of tension, stress, worry, anxiety and the near end of the world. So a really important part of the course, we need to get our head around it. This is one of those stories that definitely is tit for tat. They did, then we did, then they did, then we did, and basically set up the rest as we know. Okay, so let's get straight into it with a little story from Dr. Seuss. What is Dr. Seuss on about in this story? All right, so this is one of Dr. Seuss's stories called The Butter Battle Book. I'll try and do it justice by reading it to you as we go through this first bit of the lesson, but I apologise if I can't do it quite as good as maybe primary school teachers might be able to do. So let's read then the Butter Battle Book and see if we can get a bit of a clue about what this next topic, the arms race, is going to be about. On the last day of summer, 10 hours before fall, my grandfather took me out to the wall. For a while he stood silent, then finally he said, with a very sad shake of his very old head, "As you know, on this side of the wall, we are Ukes. On the far side of this wall live the Zooks. Then my grandfather said, it's high time that you knew of the terribly horrible thing that Zooks do. In every Zook house and in every Zook town, every Zook eats his bread with the butter side down. But we Ukes, as you know, when we breakfast or sup, spread our bread, Grandpa said, with the butter side up. That's the right honest way, Grandpa gritted his teeth, so you can't trust a Zook who spreads bread underneath. Every Zook must be watched, he has kinks in his soul. That's why as a youth I made watching my goal, watching Zooks for the Zook watching border patrol. In those days, of course, the wall wasn't so high, and I could look any Zook square in the eye. If he dared to come close, I could give him a twitch with my tough-tufted prickly snickberry switch. For a while that worked fine, all the Zooks stayed away, and our country was safe. Then one terrible day, a very rude Zook by the name of Van Itch snuck up and slingshotted my snickberry switch. With my broken-off switch, with my head hung in shame, to the chief Ukaroo in great sorrow I came. But our leader just smiled, he said, "You're not to blame, and those Zooks will be sorry they started this game. We'll dress you right up in a fancier suit, we'll give you a fancier slingshot to shoot." And he ordered the boys in the back room to figure how to build me some sort of triple sling jigger. With my triple sling jigger I sure felt much bigger. I marched up to the wall with great vim and great vigour, right up to Van Itch with my hand on the trigger. "I'll have no more nonsense," I said with a frown, "from Zooks who eat bread with the butter side down." Van Itch looked quite sickly, he ran off quite quickly. I'm unhappy to say he came back the next day in a spiffy new suit with a big new machine, and he snarled as he said, looking frightfully mean, "You may fling those hard rocks with your triple sling jigger, but I also now have my hand on a trigger. My wonderful weapon, the jigger rock snatch 'em. We'll fling 'em right back just as quick as we catch 'em. We'll have no more nonsense, we'll take no more gup from you Ukes who eat bread with the butter side up." Well, we didn't do, and we didn't quite die, but we sure did get worsted, poor Daniel and I. Van Itch was there too, and he said, the old pig, "The boys in my back room invented this rig, called the 8-nozzled elephant-toted boom blitz. It shoots high-explosive sour cherry stone pits, and we'll put you dumb kickapoo kid on the fritz." Poor Daniel and I were scared out of our wits. Those boys in the back room sure knew how to putter. They made me a thing called the utterly sputter, and I jumped aboard with my heart all aflutter and steered towards the land of the upside-down butter. This machine was so modern, so frightfully new, no one knew quite exactly just what it would do, but it had several nozzles that sprinkled blue goo, which somehow would sprinkle the Zooks as I flew, and gum up the upside-down buttery they chew. I was racing pell-mell when I heard a voice yell, "If you sprinkle us Zooks, you'll get sprinkled as well." Van Itch had a sputter exactly like mine, and he yelled, "My blue gooer is working just fine, and I'm here to say that if Ukes can goo Zooks, you better forget it, 'cause Zooks can goo Ukes." I raced to his office, the place was a sight. "Have no fear," said the chief, "everything's all right. My bright backroom boys have been brighter than bright. They've thought up a gadget that's newer than new. It's filled with a mysterious moo-like-a-moo, and can blow all those Zooks clear to Salamoogoo. They invented this, the bitsy big boy boomeroo." You just run to the wall like a nice little man. Drop this bomb on the Zooks just as fast as you can. I have ordered all Ukes to stay safe underground while the bitsy big boy Boomeroo is around. Grandpa leapt up that wall with a lupulous leap, and he cleared his horse throat with a populous beep. He screamed, "Here's the end of that terrible town, full of Zooks who eat bread with the butter side down." And at the very instant we heard the clup clup of feet on the wall, and old Van Itch clumped up. The boys in his back room had made him one too. In his first was another big boy Boomeroo. "I'll blow you," he yelled, "into pork and wee beans. I'll butter side up you to small smithereens." "Grandpa," I shouted, "be careful. Oh, gee, who's going to drop it? Will you or will he?" "Be patient," said Grandpa. "We'll see. We will see." All right, so that story is really quite a cool story, a typical Dr. Seuss, but hopefully having listened to that, you've got a really good idea about what's coming in this lesson now. That story symbolises the idea that whatever one side builds, the other one builds a bigger one, and in the end, they've built something so powerful and so destructive that neither of them know quite what to do with it. The weapons got better, they got bigger, they got stronger. That's the gist of it. So if you remember this story, then this is certainly going to help us in our understanding of the arms race. So let's crack on then with the arms race, okay? How did it develop? So that means how did it get worse? How did it get bigger? Okay? So as the Cold War is now about to intensify in the 50s, just let's take a little bit of a recap. Before we start answering this question, how significant was the arms race? So we're looking at the Berlin crisis here. Describe in your book, on your notes, if you're watching this for the first time because you missed the lesson, try to describe the Berlin crisis that we've just done in class using the bullet points on the screen to help. And if you are using this episode as revision, then have a little think yourself, either in notes, write something, or just maybe think to yourself about the Berlin crisis and Berlin 1. Remember that there is a Berlin 1 video online on our website too, as well as a revision video too. All right, so the Berlin 1 story, as we know, should be very secure, particularly if you are watching this at the end of year 11 preparing for your exams. So where are we as we get into the 50s? So Berlin crisis has kicked off. We had Bisonia, Trisonia. That has led to the Berlin blockade from Stalin, and then of course the Berlin airlift. Lasted a year, really high tension. But what's clear as we've come out of the Berlin crisis is there are two clear camps. Europe is split clearly east and west, and Stalin and America are very much aggressive in their words. The Truman Doctrine has threatened to stop communism no matter what, using force or money, military force or money. And of course, America had a bit of a head start in the arms race. They had the nuke first, and Stalin's been spending the last few years trying to catch up. So that's the sort of lead into the 50s, going from fairly reasonable relations in the Potsdam Conference and the Yalta Conference to end in the 40s really, really badly, it's got to be said, with the Truman Doctrine and then the telegrams. And then this, Stalin has of course as well built up his buffer zone by this point, which looks to the west that he's trying to spread communism. So the tension is there. Hopefully we've set the scene in the first little bit of this lesson that we're ready for something to kick off. It's probably okay if it kicked off right now. It wouldn't end the war with nuclear devastation, but at the end of this lesson you'll see how quickly that changes, and tactics have to change to a more deterrent approach than a more provocative approach. So let's see them. All right, so we've got Truman. He has obviously developed the atomic bomb, used it on Japan in 1945. Feeling pretty confident, I think, that America's the only country that has this. And Russia have obviously got just conventional weapons. So he knows that Russia have got more conventional weapons, but that doesn't matter because America has got this nuke. So the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, it's all going really well in Europe. Money's flying around. Stalin's embarrassed. He's angry. He's fuming after Berlin. But there's a race, and Stalin is about to catch up. So he is going to have his first atomic bomb in 1949. Now Truman has to sort of step back a little bit. America has to step back a little bit too, because both sides have got nuclear bombs now. So this is the arms race. One will buy one, build one will build 10. They'll build 20, they'll build 30. And that's kind of what happens for the rest of the Cold War course. But this is where we are now if you're watching this for the first time, because you missed the lesson in class. But remember for revision where this slots into the big picture of the Cold War story. So here's the arms race in a bit of a nutshell. In 1952, in response to Stalin's atomic bomb, the United States then developed the hydrogen bomb. This is 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb, which again gives the Soviet Union the chasing. They're back to chasing again and makes America back in charge, back in the advantage. But of course, it's not going to be long, is it, until Stalin develops the hydrogen bomb as well. So this tit for tat kind of cat and mouse game, no one's going to win this potentially in the end if it comes to a nuclear war. So in August then of 1953, much sooner than it took them to get the atomic bomb, Stalin and the Soviets have their hydrogen bomb. In 1957, the United States then go on to develop the intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs we'll call them from now on. They can fire nuclear warheads to any target about 4,500 kilometers away. So this is dangerous. This means we can start firing weapons that could make destruction, massive destruction, and we don't even need to get close to the country that we're firing it on. That's the worry. All right, and then in August 1957, the Soviet Union then begins testing its first ICBMs. So in this first little page that we're looking at in this lesson, it's very clear who's in the ascendancy, who gets there first, but then there's always a catch-up. So no one is winning this. But there's some context that's happening in between this arms race that we need to get our head around. In January 1953, Truman is replaced by Eisenhower. We'll have a little look at Eisenhower in a sec. And then in March 1953, Stalin dies, which then leads to this power struggle in the United Soviet Socialist Republic, in the Soviet Union. Khrushchev is going to be the guy who's going to replace Stalin a couple of years later, but you can see there that it's taken a couple of years to get Khrushchev in power, maybe showing the Soviet Union a little bit of weakness, maybe America feeling they were quite strong at this point. But it doesn't matter, because you can see by the rest of the screen that by 1957, just 7 years into the 50s, we've had this arms race which has left both sides with masses of nuclear bombs that could essentially end the world. And that is obviously the worry now of the Cold War. It officially becomes cold. We want to try and keep it cold, remember, because if it becomes a hot war, that will be the end of humanity. So with that little bit of context there, let's move on a little bit. To think about who this Khrushchev guy is. Who is Khrushchev? Is he different to Stalin? Is he as aggressive as Stalin? Let's have a little look and break this one down. Before we do that though, let's have a little look at just to support what we've just done, a couple of sources. This first source you can see, it just gives us dates, okay? So we can talk about in our knowledge what happens if you really struggle to remember these dates. So 45, 52, 57, and then for Russia 49, 53, 57. Just try and remember atomic bomb first, then hydrogen bomb, then ICBMs. If you can remember the order of those, then you can put that into a story, can't you? Into a narrative, if it ever fits into a narrative, or the importance for development of the Cold War of the arms race. That would be probably a more obvious question for this topic. How important was the arms race for the development of the Cold War? Then here you go. There's a beautiful paragraph here of facts and information of when each new bomb was created. And of course, you would say why this leads to the tensions that it does, especially the ICBMs giving us the long-range attack, the hydrogen bomb being 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. All of these things are developing the Cold War by raising tensions and raising the likelihood. But also developing the Cold War in terms of they're going to have to start trying to stop a war rather than provoking a war, which changes everything, doesn't it? And then the second source to look at is just some numbers of how much the superpowers are spending in billions in the years 49, 50, 51, 52 and 53. And then you can sort of just talk about similars. So 50% more, as you can see in 53. Sort of round your numbers up, but you can see that America is spending always more, but the Russians are also spending more and more and more all the time as well. That's a huge amount of money to be spending on arms, especially post-war, post-World War II. America also sending billions of money, billions of dollars around Europe, remember, with the Marshall Plan. So it's expensive. This Cold War is getting very expensive. So with the two sources there that we've just looked at, that's two images, just pause the video and analyse those sources a bit and answer that question. How important was the arms race for the development of the Cold War? So it's going to be question 3, but get yourself a little practice of a really good couple of paragraphs on how this was important as it led to this, led to that, led to the other. Try and get your dates and your numbers in. So do it with the pictures on the screen, especially this one that gives us costs, how much each side are spending. I think that'll be a really good opportunity for you to practice, especially if you are watching this in year 11 as a little revision video. All right, once you've done that, unpause the video. Remember, as always, any questions that you do, make sure your teacher sees that so they can give you some feedback. And if you're watching this for the first time because you missed a lesson, then you need to do this exercise because we'll have done it in class. Okay, so let's move on when you're ready to the rest of this story. You'll be given in your Google Classroom this document if you missed the lesson, but if you are watching this as revision, look at the screen and just maybe think about, it's harder to highlight perhaps if you haven't got a copy. If you need a copy, ask your teacher, but you can just have a little look at maybe on a bit of paper, colour in each of the events the colour of whatever side is in the lead. These things that we're looking at on the screen, if say that USA uses nuclear weapons in Japan, then clearly you're going to colour that one where that shows the United States in the lead. The little key at the top can help. So when you do that, you get this idea about where there was a period in the decade where one country was perhaps more ahead than the other, or was it just always a case of America first and Russia catching up? The colouring and the highlighting will really help you do that, and that will stand out. Okay, so once you've done that and you're happy with that, pause the video and then we'll carry on and finish this lesson off. So another source that we can look at, again, you could probably add that to your question earlier, is just some facts and figures. Really useful table just to give us some facts, especially if you're interested in this kind of thing. We can clearly see specifics of where the United States are in the lead and where the Soviet Union's in the lead. We can see the ICBMs. Both sides have got plenty. Maybe America got slightly more, but clearly there's enough. The SLBMs, the submarine launch missiles, America's completely ahead of the game on that one. The SLBMs will come into play in the SALT talks later on in détente. But basically, you can see that America's leading the way. Then you've got your medium and intermediate range. So the Soviet Union's well ahead of them. Bombers, America's flying ahead. Aircraft carriers, they're the big ships that can take aircraft and bombs closer to the enemy if we need. It's not even close, is it? 24 to none. Nuclear submarines, America's capability again dwarfing that of the Soviet Union. The Soviets have got more conventional submarines. Damage can still be done. And then manpower, there's not much in that, is there, as far as actual soldiers. So by 1961, this is what we're looking at as far as the arms race is concerned. But the bottom line is both sides have got enough weaponry to end humanity. And that's the end of the arms race. That is the significant consequence of the arms race. So before we move on, just have a little think, pause the video. Who do you consider at the moment is the weaker of these two superpowers by 1961 and why? Bear in mind, both sides have got enough weapons, but ultimately, who's the weaker? Which, although some may have more in numbers, do you class certain weapons as more powerful? So having less of them is equally as good. Have a little think about that. It's just interesting, really, to have a little think aside. As a historian, outside the box a little bit, rather than just accepting sometimes everything we see. Make some decisions, make some interpretations of this information. When you are ready, let's carry on. So source A shows us here a photograph of the US atomic bomb in the Pacific in 1951. And of course, the Soviets will know that we're testing bombs. We know that they're testing bombs as well. And every time a bomb is tested, there is suspicion, there is mistrust, and of course, there's panic. So the significance of the arms race cannot be understated. By this point, just to summarise where we've come from in the story now, both the USA and the Soviet Union have spent stupid money. We can see that in the previous sources. The navies are higher, the submarine fleets. It's also important to try and make sure that we're staying ahead of each other for ego, for brinkmanship and all those things. But the weapons that are being developed are so powerful that now we could literally obliterate the planet. So we've got this new kind of weirdness out of this, despite having these super weapons and we should all be feeling really great. we now know that we could end the world. So both sides have started moving towards prevention rather than starting wars. And that's good for all of humanity. And clearly, as we go through the Cold War course, there's going to be some really tense points, Cuba being the most obvious one. But obviously we get to the point where it's very, very scary what could happen. So this is the significance of the arms race. This little blue box really is probably where you want to be in a paragraph for question 3 in how important was it. Maybe the question you've just had to go at earlier in this lesson looks something like that blue box with some extra facts and figures. Okay, so let's move on then to a little bit to this idea of the 2 new leaders that we mentioned just a while ago. So we've got President Eisenhower, who becomes the new president in January 1953, and we've got Khrushchev, who after a couple of years of some, I don't know, political infighting within the Soviet Union, he comes out on top as the new leader. So this is a little summary, this yellow box, of the 2 leaders. Clearly Eisenhower wants to avoid nuclear war, as does anybody. He's been elected with that kind of promise. So he's going to try and improve relations with the Soviet Union. As we know, Truman and Stalin they hated each other from the very first minute they met, and then till they both are out of power, and obviously Stalin has died. And Khrushchev is similarly quite positive in his introduction to the world. He's talking about peaceful coexistence. He's very much anti-Stalin. That's possibly why it took so long to get him elected, or picked, whatever it is they did in the Soviet Union to get the new leader. That he hates Stalin, and he goes in this process, which we'll look at in a sec, of de-Stalinization. He tries to say to the world, everything Stalin did was wrong. I am going to do things very differently. And with both of these new leaders talking fairly positively, by 1956, I think the world can possibly breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. Just for some context to the Year 11s who are watching this for revision, remember 1956 is Khrushchev's first introduction to the politics of the game of the Cold War in Hungary, with his absolutely brutal response to the Hungarian uprising with 20,000 dead Hungarians, remember. So he's quite clearly not willing to use force. And maybe that was a message to America more than it was to Hungary, that this new leader is not to be messed with. I don't know, we could talk about that at length, couldn't we? That is definitely a fair or valid inference to make as to why Khrushchev, in his first real challenge, was brutal in Hungary. Anyway, as it stands as far as America and Russia are concerned with these 2 leaders, it looks quite positive, all right? So Nikita Khrushchev then, as we've said, goes on this speech, this big rant about being everything that Stalin wasn't, de-Stalinization and this peaceful coexistence. We hate each other. You're communists, we're capitalists. We know all this. The Cold War's been going on now for a little while, but he is willing to hate but exist peacefully. All right. So these photographs are just quite interesting. And around the Soviet Union, around the Warsaw Pact, they pull down Stalin's statues, part of the de-Stalinization. So probably, despite the arms race really raising tensions, Khrushchev's sort of rise to power may well have reduced some of the tension in the world, perhaps. Okay, so he goes on to say this. This is Khrushchev's words. You do not like communism. We do not like capitalism. There is only one way out. Peaceful coexistence. We must help the people eat well, dress well, and live well. Because if after 40 years of communism a person cannot have a glass of milk or a pair of shoes, he will not believe communism is a good thing. So there's definitely a change here, isn't there, in aggression, in tact from the new Soviet leader. He seems to be more focused on trying to make life better in the Soviet Union for the people in the Soviet Union, which might mean he's less bothered about America and the West. Let's see how long this lasts, okay? So what do you reckon the consequences then of Khrushchev taking over are for US-Soviet relations? Again, a nice question 3. For US-Soviet relations, I think we're going to have some positive language in there, although there is an element of tension too, in the fact that he has got all these weapons. But it does sound a little bit more positive having him around. Okay, so a new thinking then, a solution to this out-of-control arms race that we've talked about in this lesson. This is where we need to be. So just for some context of what's happening as we approach the mid to late 50s, the Korean War has now ended. That was intense. America supported South Korea while the Soviets obviously supported North Korea. The fighting has now stopped for a couple of years, so again that reduces the tension in Europe and between the superpowers. Also, of course, the cost of the arms. That is literally bankrupting countries. It's so expensive to build these nuclear weapons. So they know that if they don't spend as many, if they don't build as many, they don't need to spend as much. And that means then that life could improve in their countries. So again, a nice positive element to this new leadership. And then in 1955, the first time the USA and the Soviet Union under the new leadership, they meet in Geneva. They always seem to meet in Geneva first, don't they? Probably because it's neutral. And they try and discuss how to run Germany. So perhaps getting a little bit back to maybe Potsdam years, and there's a bit of a grand alliance, but still a bit of tension, but they kind of work together. It looks like they're trying to do that, Khrushchev and Eisenhower. So they get together in Geneva, maybe not face to face as such, but the countries and their administrations meet to try and talk through Germany. Especially after the crisis, the blockade. It's important that we sort of get that together. Nothing was agreed at Geneva, as ever happens. It's always the same. Nothing's agreed, but always the positive is these two sides are showing that they could work together. Again, the world probably by this point is breathing a huge sigh of relief. But still, we've been building all these weapons. So I guess it's going well, but there's a few little trinkets that's going to get in the way of this really positive relationship, or this positive start at least. And this is in 1955. In 1955, things go a little bit south, a little bit tense, shall we say. West Germany officially joins NATO, which of course then scares the Soviet Union, exactly as it is today in the Ukraine crisis, that a NATO country on the border of a satellite state of the Warsaw Pact is a worry for the Soviet Union that they could be attacked. So that's raised tensions. So then the Soviet Union have set up the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is basically their version of NATO, where all the satellite states are in this gang together. They are going to look after each other if one country's attacked. It's exactly the same as NATO. Personally, I have no problem with the Warsaw Pact. If we're allowed NATO, then they should be allowed the Warsaw Pact. But what it essentially does as a consequence has clearly now not just officially to split European sides, East and West, but two economic and military based sides now. So the NATO and the Warsaw Pact with military support, this could escalate very quickly if any country feels that anyone's invaded anyone or attacked or hindered any one of the countries in each other's different alliance. So 1955 is definitely a turning point. All the positives so far in this lesson, you can see that's a problem. So tensions are going to start ratcheting up now. The arms race is going on and on and on and on. Maybe perhaps this wasn't such a big deal, but put this, what you're looking at now, with the arms race, then perhaps you can start to see those tensions. Maybe that peaceful coexistence might start getting just a little bit more difficult for Khrushchev to maintain. All right. And then suspicion gets even worse then in the arms race as we move to a space race. So Sputnik is invented and introduced by the Soviet Union in 1957, which is a satellite that could orbit the Earth in 90 minutes. The United States saw this as a military threat. They saw Khrushchev as threatening America, which is interesting when Khrushchev is allegedly trying to work with the Americans. But anyway, as it is, the USA see this as a threat. They get a little bit paranoid. And always these things lead to a consequence. The consequence in this case being tension, paranoia, fear, and of course, as everything is tit for tat in this, America's now going to go and try and join the arms race, the space race as well. So that then leads us to the space race. So there's your consequence of Sputnik. Just another little thing like the Warsaw Pact being set up just to maybe raise the suspicion of this so-called peaceful coexistence. Is Khrushchev telling the truth? Is he genuinely interested in peace, or is he just saying that? And that's kind of where we are in the end of the 50s. All right, so in response to that, a nice consequence would be, if we ever get asked this question, Eisenhower increases his spending on missiles by another 20%, and you know that he's telling the Soviet Union that he's doing that, and he founds NASA, obviously one of the most famous institutions in the entire world today. So America now starts to lead the space race, and this is just the beginning, introducing NASA. A further reaction to Sputnik sees the USA put missiles in Europe, especially in West Germany, some of these new missiles that we've been making in this lesson. of course, the tension, it's just insane. These new ICBMs, these new hydrogen bombs, now with the B-52 bombers and our new submarines. Really, Eisenhower, you could argue, is the aggressor here. All Russia have done is throw a bit of metal up into the sky. But when you don't know what it is, and we're in the middle of this Cold War and stuff, of course, there's going to be some response. Maybe you could argue Eisenhower was a bit extreme. 20% more on missiles being spent. So the arms race is just ramping up, as well as the arms race we've now begun. The space race, okay? So these things are going hand in hand. America arguably wins the space race by getting to the moon first in 1969. So obviously there's things like that, but you'll see as well in détente, if you're watching this for the first time or year 11, you're aware that eventually they start working together in space. But as anything, it starts off really aggressively, but the difference here to maybe the early to late 50s or 40s, late 40s, is that both sides have got huge amounts of nuclear weapons now, and Eisenhower is quite clearly showing it off, despite the start, of both of these leaders being fairly positive. All right, so that is the end of this lesson. Hopefully that was helpful for you, just to get your head around the arms race a little bit. It's just very tit for tat, but there's other context going on that you probably need to be aware of, and hopefully just talking through this short lesson has done that for you. As always, all lessons are on our website at stchistory.com. And as always, if you've got any questions, please let us know. Thank you very much for watching. And if you need anything else, as I say, let your teacher know. And we'll see you shortly for the next video. Thank you and goodbye.